The entire history of Slovenia. Stand in Slovenia today, and the world seems almost impossibly peaceful. Snow-covered mountains rise above blue-green rivers. Church bells echo across medieval towns. Forests conceal castles, caves, Roman ruins, and the remains of forgotten battlefields. But this quiet country was never isolated. For thousands of years, armies, merchants, emperors, revolutionaries, and refugees crossed this narrow gateway between the Alps, the Adriatic, Central Europe, and the Balkans. Slovenia may be one of Europe's youngest nations, but its story is ancient. Long before Slovenia had borders, its landscape was already shaping its destiny. To the north stood the Alps. To the south stretched the Adriatic Sea. Eastward lay the Pannonian Plain, while limestone plateaus and underground caves dominated the west. Anyone traveling between Italy, Austria, Hungary, and the Balkans eventually passed through this land. Trade followed these routes. But so did invasion. This is the history of a people who spent centuries living inside other kingdoms and empires, preserving their identity not through armies or royal dynasties, but through language, memory, and culture. Before Slovenia, thousands of years ago, the Ljubljana marshes looked nothing like the capital that stands there today. The landscape was wet, wild, and covered in shallow lakes. Communities constructed wooden homes raised above the water on stilts. Small boats moved silently through reeds as hunters, farmers, and traders crossed the marshes. During the Iron Age, fortified settlements appeared on hilltops. Amber, salt, metals, and pottery moved through the region, connecting local communities to distant European trade networks. Then came Rome. By the 1st century, Roman roads cut across the landscape. Soldiers marched beside carts, carrying wine, grain, weapons, and luxury goods. Emona rose near modern Ljubljana. Poetovio developed into an important military and commercial center near present-day Potuj. Celea, now Celje, became known for trade and craftsmanship. Stone buildings replaced wooden settlements. Public baths filled with conversation. Merchants shouted in crowded marketplaces. Roman officials collected taxes, while troops guarded the mountain passes leading toward Italy. But Rome's wealth made these roads valuable to invaders as well. As the Western Roman Empire weakened, its towns declined. Fortifications were abandoned. Roads fell silent. A new population was about to enter the mountains, the Slavs, and Carantania. During the 6th and 7th centuries, Slavic-speaking communities settled across the eastern Alpine region. They cleared forests, cultivated valleys, and established villages beside rivers. Their language would eventually develop into Slovene. One of the earliest political communities associated with these people was Carantania. It emerged during the 7th century, centered mostly north of modern Slovenia, in what is now Austrian Carinthia. It was not Slovenia in the modern sense, but its traditions would become an important part of Slovenian historical memory. Carantanian rulers were installed through a remarkable ceremony in which a peasant, seated upon a stone, symbolically questioned the new prince before allowing him to rule. Yet Carantania could not remain independent. Pressure from neighboring powers pushed it into the Frankish sphere. Christian missionaries arrived, churches appeared, and the region became tied to the political and religious world of medieval Central Europe. Further south, Carniola developed as a frontier territory. Castles appeared above roads and river valleys. Beneath them grew market towns filled with blacksmiths, farmers, traveling merchants, and craftsmen. The land was becoming richer, but control of it increasingly belonged to foreign dynasties. Centuries under the Habsburgs. By the late Middle Ages, much of the territory inhabited by Slovenes had passed under Habsburg rule. For centuries, the Slovenian lands remained divided among regions such as Carniola, Styria, Carinthia, and the littoral. There was no Slovenian kingdom and no single Slovenian government. Life was local. A farmer in the mountains might rarely travel beyond his valley. Town residents often heard German in government offices, Italian near the coast, Hungarian in the northeast, and Slovene in villages and homes. The countryside was repeatedly shaken by disaster. Ottoman raiders attacked settlements near the southeastern frontier. Villagers sought shelter behind fortified church walls. Heavy feudal duties triggered peasant uprisings, only for poorly armed rebels to be crushed by noble armies. Then, during the 16th century Reformation, something happened that would prove more powerful than any revolt. Slovene began appearing in print. In 1550, Protestant reformer Primož Trubar published the first books in the Slovenian language. In 1584, Jurij Dalmatin produced a complete Slovene translation of the Bible. Religious conflict followed, and the Catholic Counter-Reformation defeated most Protestant communities. But the written language survived. Slovenes still had no state. Now, however, they possessed something that could cross every provincial border. Words. Napoleon. And the National Awakening. In 1809, Napoleon's armies defeated Austria and created the Illyrian provinces, with Ljubljana serving as their capital. French control lasted only a few years, but it disrupted the old order. Administrative reforms were introduced, roads improved, and Slovene gained greater visibility in schools and public life. When Austrian rule returned in 1813, the memory remained. Across Europe, nationalism was growing. Intellectuals collected folk songs, studied grammar, wrote poetry, and argued that Slovenes were not merely provincial peasants divided between empires. They were a nation. Poet Franz Prešeren gave that identity an emotional voice. His poetry imagined dignity, freedom, and friendship among peoples. A section of his poem Zdravljica would later become Slovenia's national anthem. During the revolutions of 1848, activists demanded a united Slovenia, bringing Slovene-speaking territories together with Slovene as an official language. The demand failed, but the idea did not disappear. Railways, newspapers, schools, reading societies, and political gatherings slowly connected communities that had once lived separate lives. A nation was forming before it possessed a country. The first, Yugoslavia. The First World War transformed the Slovenian lands into a zone of death. Along the nearby Isonzo front, Italian and Austro-Hungarian armies fought across mountains, valleys, and the emerald waters of the Socha River. Soldiers froze in high-altitude trenches, artillery shattered cliffs, villages were evacuated, and families fled from the front. When Austria-Hungary collapsed in 1918, Slovenes joined Croats and Serbs in creating a new South Slavic state, soon called the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. For the first time, most Slovenes lived inside a state shared with other Slavic peoples. Yet the borders brought pain. Slovene-speaking communities were left inside Italy, Austria, and Hungary. Under fascist Italy, Slovenian schools and organizations were suppressed, names were Italianized, and public use of the language was restricted. Then Europe moved toward another war. And this time, Slovenia itself would be torn apart. Occupation and resistance. In April 1941, Axis forces invaded Yugoslavia. Slovenian territory was divided between Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and Hungary. The occupiers did not simply want control. In many areas, they attempted to erase Slovenian identity. Families were expelled. Slovene books disappeared from schools. Prisoners were deported. Hostages were executed. Some Slovenian men were forced into foreign armies. Resistance movements formed in forests and mountains, with communist-led partisans eventually becoming the dominant force. But the struggle was not simple. Occupation, revolution, collaboration, resistance, and civil conflict became entangled. Slovenes fought foreign armies, but they also fought one another. When the war ended in 1945, liberation brought a new socialist order. It also brought executions and reprisals against defeated opponents and civilians. The country survived occupation, but the wounds of the war would remain politically sensitive for generations. Factories expanded, villagers moved into towns, new apartment blocks rose beside older churches and Habsburg streets. Education, healthcare, transportation, and industry developed rapidly. Because Slovenia bordered Austria and Italy, it remained strongly connected to Western markets. Compared with much of Yugoslavia, it became industrialized and relatively prosperous. For several decades, the system appeared stable. But after Tito died in 1980, economic crisis deepened. Inflation rose, unemployment grew, and relations between Yugoslavia's republics became increasingly bitter. In Slovenia, journalists, artists, students, environmental groups, and human rights activists challenged communist authority. The question was no longer whether Yugoslavia should change. It was whether Yugoslavia could survive at all. Independence. In April 1990, Slovenia held its first multi-party elections since the Second World War. That December, citizens voted on independence. More than 88% of all eligible voters supported the creation of a sovereign Slovenian state. On June 25, 1991, Slovenia adopted its independence acts. Almost immediately, Yugoslav military vehicles began moving toward border crossings and strategic positions. Sirens sounded. Barricades blocked roads. Slovenian police and territorial defense units confronted the Yugoslav People's Army. The conflict lasted approximately 10 days. It was brief compared with the devastating wars that later consumed Croatia and Bosnia, but its outcome was historic. Yugoslav forces withdrew, and Slovenia secured its independence. In 1992, international recognition followed, and Slovenia entered the United Nations as a sovereign state. Slovenia returns to Europe. Independence brought freedom, but also uncertainty. State-owned industries were restructured. Businesses entered competitive markets. Some people discovered new opportunities, while others lost the security they had known under socialism. Yet Slovenia's transition remained comparatively stable. In 2004, it joined both NATO and the European Union. In 2007, it adopted the euro and entered the Schengen area, allowing easier movement across borders that had divided communities for generations. The old crossroads had changed again. Roman soldiers, Habsburg officials, Napoleonic armies, and Yugoslav border guards were gone. The routes remained open. Today, Slovenia is a small country surrounded by larger neighbors. Yet within its borders are traces of nearly every chapter of European history. Roman walls beneath Ljubljana, medieval castles above forested valleys, Habsburg facades beside socialist apartment blocks, war cemeteries hidden beneath alpine peaks, and through it all, one language that survived without a kingdom, without an empire, and for centuries without a state. Slovenia's history is not the story of a nation that conquered the world. It is the story of a nation that refused to disappear. Despite invasion, occupation, division, revolution, and war, the people preserved their words, their culture, and their memory long enough to finally build a country of their own. And perhaps that is Slovenia's greatest achievement, not that it became powerful, but that it survived. Subscribe for more journeys through the hidden history of Europe, and tell us in the comments which country's entire story we should explore next.